The night the heartbeat stopped, a stethoscope in a thrift shop whispered a nurse's fate. But no one heard her cry beneath the hospital's heartbeat. Chicago, 1979. The city was loud, alive, and often unkind. Steel trains roared overhead, like thunder in the sky, and the streets below bore the silent weight of secrets people never dared to speak aloud. In the heart of that chaos stood Lakeside General Hospital tall, pale and worn like a tired sentinel. Its corridors were long, dimly lit, and smelled faintly of antiseptic, old paper, and weary souls. And inside those corridors worked a woman who had made compassion her calling. Her name was Ellen Carter. She wasn't the kind of nurse that clocked in and out. No, Ellen was the kind of nurse who sat with the dying when their families couldn't. She remembered patients' birthdays, smuggled extra pudding cups to those with no visitors, and made even the coldest ward feel just a little warmer. To her colleagues, she was Saint Ellen. To patients, she was a quiet miracle. To her sister Diane, she was everything. Ellen had moved to Chicago in '76, freshly licensed and full of fire. She wrote Diane every Sunday like clockwork. Letters filled with stories, not gossip, but little human details. An elderly man who'd held her hand and whispered, "Don't forget me." A baby born premature who squeezed her finger and wouldn't let go. Ellen didn't just treat people. She saw them. And that's why what happened next made so little sense. Because on November 12, 1979, Ellen Carter vanished. She was scheduled for the 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. shift, cardiology ward. Room 618 was her favorite 18-old jazz pianist named Mr. Calloway, who told stories that made the whole staff laugh. She checked in on him at 10:30 p.m. One of the aides remembered that after that, she was never seen again. Her locker was locked. Her coat was there. Her purse was untouched. But Ellen was gone. No one saw her leave. No calls, no notes. It was like she'd been erased. At first, the staff whispered, theories: burnout, runaway, maybe even suicide. But those who really knew her, they knew better. Ellen Carter wouldn't just disappear. She loved too hard. She stayed too long. She fought for people, and her sister, Diane. She felt it, deep in her bones. Diane Carter lived just outside Milwaukee, working as a school counselor. The call came the next morning. It was the hospital's HR bland voice, routine phrasing. "Your sister didn't clock out last night. We're not sure where she went. Have you heard from her?" Diane said no. Then her hands began to shake. She drove to Chicago that same afternoon. 3 hours on the highway, not even noticing the grey winter clouds swallowing the sky above her. By the time she reached the hospital, Ellen had been missing. For nearly 18 hours. What struck Diane first was how normal everything looked. Nurses moved from room to room. The coffee machine was humming. Visitors sat in chairs flipping through old magazines. But behind those motions was a quiet tension, a chill in the air. Because someone had gone missing under their roof. And no, one knew how Diane was escorted to the nurse manager's office, a woman named Ruth Lansing. Her face was tired. Her voice was practiced. "We're all worried," she said, folding her hands. "But it's possible your sister just needed a break. These jobs are hard." Diane's face didn't flinch. She wouldn't run. Ruth offered a slight nod. "We've notified security and filed a missing persons report with the local police. If anything turns up, we'll contact you immediately." But days passed, then weeks, and no calls came. Detective Mark Hoyt was the one assigned to the case. A man in his 50s, with sunken eyes and a voice like gravel. He asked the routine questions. Did Ellen have a boyfriend? Any enemies? Money problems? Had she ever talked about leaving? Diane answered each one, no, 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 and absolutely not. The detective scribbled in his notebook and sighed. Sometimes people just disappear, he said. Diane wanted to scream, but she didn't single quote. She just clenched her fists and asked to see the security footage. That's when she learned a hard truth. In 1979, most hospital cameras didn't work. They were there to scare off thieves, not actually record anything. The ones in the stairwell, disconnected. The basement hallway, nothing but static. The only working camera faced the main entrance, and Ellen never left through it. Just gone. That winter, Diane rented a tiny apartment near the hospital. She posted flyers, visited shelters, and called local papers. Most people stopped returning her calls after the first 2 weeks. The world, it seemed, was used to missing people, but Diane wasn't. She wrote to Ellen every day even, though there was no address to send the letters to. Pages and pages of updates, hopes, and apologies. The worst of them said just 4 words. I should have called sooner, because part of her knew something had been off. Ellen's last letter had mentioned a new doctor, Dr. Raymond Cole. She'd called him brilliant but distant, and said he always asked unusual questions during rounds. He stares too long. She'd written once, like he's trying to see inside you, but Diane hadn't thought much of it. Not until now. By March 1980, Ellen's case had gone cold. No leads, no sightings, no evidence. Just an empty locker, and 100 unanswered questions. The hospital quietly moved on. They hired a new nurse. Room 618 got repainted. Even Mr. Calloway had passed away, but Diane, she stayed. She took shifts at a local school, saved every penny. And once a week, she returned to Lakeside General's to sit in the waiting room, hoping, somehow, that Ellen would come walking out of the elevator like nothing had happened that never happened. What did happen was stranger, and it wouldn't begin to unfold until 1983. Whispers in white coats. 3 years later, the city had changed, but Diane hadn't. It was 1983 now. The Chicago skyline was taller, the music louder, the streets busier, but for Diane Carter, time was stuck on November 12, 1979, the date her sister vanished, the night the world stopped making sense. People told her to move on, to find closure, but they didn't know what she knew. They didn't know the way Ellen's eyes lit up when she spoke about her patients. They didn't know she always brought cookies to work on Fridays, or carried an old Polaroid of Diane in her wallet. They didn't know Ellen had been scared. Diane remembered the last letter, every word. Some nights I feel like I'm being watched in the hallway, like someone standing just out of view, breathing, but not speaking. I could just be tired. But it's a strange kind of tired, Dee. It's the kind that comes with silence. Diane never shared that letter with the police. She kept it folded. Inside her journal, it was the last thing Ellen had ever written. Now 34. Diane was thinner, sharper, more withdrawn. Her once warm voice now carried an edge, the kind of voice that came from living too long in limbo. But her eyes, those hadn't changed. They still searched, every face in every crowd, every bus stop, every nurse's station. She still believed. Her sister was alive, or, at least, she had to believe. She took a part-time job, working night shifts as a receptionist in a downtown counseling clinic, just enough to pay rent. During the day, she haunted Lakeside General like a ghost. Not officially, of course, but she volunteered where she could, reading to patients, assisting with clerical work, anything to stay inside those walls. It was during one of those quiet afternoons, sitting on a bench near the hospital chapel, that she overheard something that made her heart lurch. 2 nurses walked past, whispering, unaware of her presence. "They say he doesn't see patients anymore, Dr. Cole." "Why?" "He's been working in the basement records department for over a year. Volunteered to go down there himself." Creepy. Their voices faded, but Diane had already stood. UP Dr. Raymond Cole, the same name Ellen had written in that last letter. Basement records department. That wasn't a place most people went willingly. It was dusty, forgotten, full of old charts and files. A place where time curled at the edges of manila folders. Why would a prestigious doctor choose to disappear into the basement that night? Diane returned to her apartment and pulled out her notebook. Every name, date, and rumor she'd ever gathered went onto the page. She circled Dr. Raymond Cole in red. She needed a way down there, not as a volunteer, as someone with access. But hospital clearance was strict, basement access required. Badge permission. Still, she wasn't without allies. One of the janitors, Luis, had become friendly with her over the months. An older man with a kind face and tired eyes. She'd brought him coffee more times than she could count. Sometimes kindness comes back when you least expect it. So she asked him, "I need to get into the basement records wing," she said quietly, one afternoon near the loading dock. "Please, it's important." Luis hesitated. "You looking for something?" "Someone," she said. He sighed, then handed her a small ring of keys. "I leave at 10. You have until 11. Don't get caught." That night, Diane descended the service stairwell to the basement. The air was colder down there, heavy, like it hadn't moved in years. The lights flickered overhead as she turned the key and opened the heavy door, marked records, staff only. The hinges groaned. Inside were rows upon rows of old metal file cabinets, some dating back to the 50s. Everything smelled like mildew and ink. She walked slowly, flashlight in hand. Every drawer she opened felt like it might hold the answer. Nothing more. Folders, more. Dust, and she heard it. A soft hum, mechanical, like a fan turning behind a wall. She followed the sound. Around a corner, she found a locked side door. It wasn't labeled, just metal. No knob, only a keycard scanner. She pressed her ear against it. Nothing. She backed away. But before she could leave, she noticed something odd on the floor beneath. The edge of the door was a tiny black thread. Fabric, like something had been caught and pulled through. She reached for it. It was soft, like part of a uniform, or a hospital gown. Diane didn't sleep that night. She returned the keys to Louise, thanked him, said nothing about what she'd seen. She didn't want to endanger him, but her gut screamed. That door wasn't just a storage room. Someone had been in there recently, and someone had left something behind. Over the next 2 weeks, Diane changed tactics. She stopped haunting the hospital. Instead, she visited every second-hand store, thrift shop, and pawn shop within 5 miles of Lakeside General. She brought a photo of Ellen, asked if anyone had seen her, asked if anyone had brought in nurse gear, uniforms, shoes, personal effects. Most said no. One old man nodded and said, We get hospital stuff sometimes, not often. It was late March when it happened. She entered a small thrift store on West Monroe Street. The bell above the door rang. Inside. The air was stale with the smell of forgotten things wool would polish, and dust. She walked past shelves of glassware and rows of old coats. Then, at the back, behind a bin of costume jewelry, she saw it. A nurse's stethoscope. Black. Slightly worn, familiar too. Familiar, she picked it up, turned it over, and there engraved, faintly near the base were 3 tiny initials. EMC, Ellen Marie. Carter. Her hands trembled. The clerk said it had been dropped off a few weeks ago by an anonymous donor. No paperwork. No ID, just a box of miscellaneous items. Diane bought it. Immediately. $10. $10 to reclaim a part of her sister's soul at home. She placed it on the table. She stared at it for hours, held it in her hands, and then something strange happened. She turned it upside down. Something shifted inside, a faint rattle, not from the bell or diaphragm, but from inside the tubing. She grabbed scissors carefully. She cut a small slit near the Y- connector. Out fell a tightly rolled piece of paper. Her breath caught. She unfolded it. The handwriting was hurried, shaky. It was Ellen's basement. Room C4. Not safe. Don't trust Cole. Please, hurry. Diane sank to the floor. Tears blurred her vision. This wasn't just a message. It was a lifeline. Her sister was or had been alive, and now Diane knew exactly where to go. Room C for the... Next morning, Diane stood in front of Lakeside General, stethoscope in her pocket, and one sentence echoing in her mind. Basement. Room C4. Not safe. Don't trust Cole. It was no longer just a disappearance. It was a cover-up, a trap. And if Ellen had hidden this message, then she had known someone was after her. Someone who had access. Someone who worked there. And that someone was still walking those halls. Diane had waited for years to find a real lead. She wasn't going to wait. Another day, Luis had stopped answering his phone. Diane didn't blame him. What she was about to do could get him fired or worse. But she remembered where he kept the spare badge. She'd seen him slide it behind a loose brick near the back stairs once, just in case. That night, dressed in old scrubs, Diane slipped into the service entrance and found the card. Still there, the hospital slept around her. Only a few nurses made their quiet rounds. She passed unnoticed through the east stairwell, down into the belly of the hospital toward the basement, toward room C4. The air below was stale, damp, and full of old secrets. Fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered like dying fireflies. As Diane walked the narrow hallway, she passed old signage, half covered in peeling paint, records. Storage, boiler access. Then she saw it. A metal door with a scratched brass plaque. C4, no knob. Just a key card, scanner same as before. Diane slid the badge, click, the lock. Disengaged, her heart thundered. She pushed open the door. What she saw didn't make sense. The room wasn't just storage. It was a living space. Old, but lived in a cot with threadbare sheets. A desk covered in medical journals and used syringes. A mirror hung crooked on the wall. The air smelled of antiseptic and metal in one corner. A small black and white TV played static. There were no windows, only one exit. But what chilled Diane most was the chair bolted to the floor in the center of the room. A restraint chair. Heavy leather straps hung limp at the arms and legs. She stepped closer. The leather was worn. Faint bloodstains marked the armrests. Someone had been kept here for a long time. On the desk was a folder, unlabeled. Inside were Polaroids, blurry, dimly lit. Each one showed a woman in a hospital gown sitting in that chair. Her face was gaunt, her hair shorter. But Diane knew her sister when she saw her. Ellen in a basement. Trapped. The last photo was dated January 4th, 1983. 3 months ago. That meant she might still be alive. Diane's hands shook. She heard a noise in the hallway at footsteps. She grabbed the photos, shoved them into her coat, and slipped behind a tall shelf near the wall just as the door opened. A man entered, tall, cold, wearing a long white coat. Dr. Raymond Cole. He didn't speak, didn't turn on the light. He simply walked to the desk, picked up the TV remote, and adjusted the static. Then he stared at the empty chair for nearly 5 minutes, like he was talking to someone, without words. Diane didn't breathe. Not once. Then Cole turned and walked back out, locking the door behind him. She waited a full 60 seconds before moving again. Her skin crawled. She wasn't imagining it. This wasn't paranoia. Her sister had been held here, tortured, isolated by a doctor. She slipped out and returned to her apartment just before dawn. She didn't sleep. Instead, she lined up the Polaroids, examined each one, and marked the changes: weight loss, bruises, eye contact. Ellen had been deteriorating, but she'd still been alive in January. Diane had to move fast. If she went to the police now, they'd ask how she got the photos, why she was snooping in hospital records. Some might dismiss her again, but there was one person who might listen. Detective Mark Hoyt, retired last year. Diane found him in a quiet suburb west of the city, working part-time security for a grocery store. He looked older, slower, but he still remembered Ellen's case. "You were the sister, right?" he said, squinting at her in the parking lot. "I was. I still am." She handed him the photos. He froze. "What the hell is this?" "Evidence." He studied them for several minutes. His voice dropped. This looks like she's been held prisoner." "She was." Hoyt exhaled slowly. "This could be criminal, Diane. I could lose my job just looking at these. I think someone already lost a life," she snapped. "I need you to help me. One more time." He hesitated, then nodded. The next day, Diane and Hoyt met in secret and created a plan. He still had connections in CPD, people who owed him favors. But if they were going to do anything, they needed undeniable proof that Ellen was still alive, which meant one thing: going back to room C4. Diane returned to Lakeside the following night with Hoyt tailing discreetly in a nearby car. If she didn't return in 30 minutes, he would call back up. She slipped inside again. Badge, stairwell, basement. But this time, something was different. Room C4's door was ajar. She stepped closer. Inside, the chair was empty. The cot missing. The photos gone. Someone had cleared the room fast. Then she saw it, scratched into the side of the metal bed frame. Barely visible. "Don't stop." Still here. Ellen had written it recently, and that meant she hadn't been moved far. Suddenly, Diane heard footsteps again running. This time, she turned, but the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the hallway. She ran, breath ragged, eyes wild behind her. A voice echoed through the corridor. Low, calm, familiar. "Dr. Cole." I knew you'd come back, Diane. She didn't look. She just ran, all the way to the emergency stairwell, all the way into the street, where Hoyt was waiting in his car. He threw open the door and hit the gas. Diane collapsed into the seat. She was shaking, but alive. And now they both knew Ellen wasn't just missing. She was being kept. The doctor's obsession for the next 2 days. Diane barely left her apartment. She didn't eat, barely slept. She just sat with the photos. That last message scratched into the bed frame kept haunting her. Don't stop. Still here. It wasn't desperation. It was defiance. Ellen was fighting, and Diane had to fight too. Detective Hoyt made a few calls. His old badge still opened doors. People respected him. Quietly, he pulled Ellen's missing persons file from the archives and reopened it, unofficially flagging it for follow-up investigation. Meanwhile, Diane kept digging into Dr. Raymond Cole. At first glance, he was the perfect physician. Graduated with honors from Northwestern. Commended 3 times for service in critical care. Published papers on patient empathy and neurological trauma. But when she looked deeper, the cracks showed. 3 nurses filed complaints against him in the late 70s for inappropriate remarks. None were pursued. One Margaret Lint transferred hospitals. Mid-year, another Samantha Kerr left medicine entirely, and the third, Ellen Carter. Diane's chest tightened. Ellen had never mentioned it, but the paper trail was there buried in HR reports, under confidential performance review. Diane had to pay an intern at Lakeside $200 in cash just to get access to a redacted copy, and there, in scribbled handwriting next to Ellen's name, not comfortable working with Dr. Coley watchers during night shifts. That complaint had been made 3 weeks before Ellen vanished. Hoyt met Diane at a small diner on the south side. Around a corner, she found a locked side door. It wasn't labeled, just metal. No knob, only a keycard scanner. She pressed her ear against it. Nothing. She backed away. But before she could leave, she noticed something odd on the floor beneath. The edge of the door was a tiny black thread. Fabric, like something had been caught and pulled through. She reached for it. It was soft, like part of a uniform or a hospital gown. Diane didn't sleep that night. She returned the keys to Louise, thanked him, said nothing about what she'd seen. She didn't want to endanger him, but her gut screamed. That door wasn't just a storage room. Someone had been in there recently, and someone had left something behind. Over the next 2 weeks, Diane changed tactics. She stopped haunting the hospital instead. She visited every second-hand store, thrift shop, and pawn shop within 5 miles of Lakeside General. She brought a photo of Ellen, asked if anyone had seen her, asked if anyone had brought in nurse gear, uniforms, shoes, personal effects. Most said no. One old man nodded and said, "We get hospital stuff sometimes, not often." It was late March when it happened. She entered a small thrift store on West Monroe Street. The bell above the door rang. Inside, the air was stale with the smell of forgotten things, wool wood polish, and dust. She walked past shelves of glassware and rows of old coats. Then, at the back, behind a bin of costume jewelry, she saw it. A nurse's stethoscope, black, slightly worn, familiar, too. Familiar. She picked it up, turned it over, and there engraved, faintly near the base, were 3 tiny initials. EMC Ellen Marie Carter. Her hands trembled. The clerk said it had been dropped off a few weeks ago by an anonymous donor. No paperwork, No ID, just a box of miscellaneous items. Diane bought it immediately. $10, $10, to reclaim a part of her sister's soul at home. She placed it on the table. She stared at it for hours, held it in her hands, and then something strange happened. She turned it upside down. Something shifted inside. A faint rattle, not from the bell or diaphragm, but from inside the tubing. She grabbed scissors carefully. She cut a small slit near the Y-dash connector. Out fell a tightly rolled piece of paper. Her breath caught. She unfolded it. The handwriting was hurried, shaky. It was Ellen's basement. Room C4. Not safe. Don't trust Cole. Please hurry. Diane sank to the floor. Tears blurred her vision. This wasn't just a message. It was a lifeline. Her sister was or had been Dash alive, and now Diane knew exactly where to go. Room C for the... Next morning, Diane stood in front of Lakeside General, stethoscope in her pocket, and one sentence echoing in her mind. Basement. Room C4. Not safe. Don't trust Cole. It was no longer just a disappearance. It was a cover-up, a trap. And if Ellen had hidden this message, then she had known someone was after her. Someone who had access. Someone who worked there. And that someone was still walking those halls. Diane had waited for years to find a real lead. She wasn't going to wait. Another day, Luis had stopped answering his phone. Diane didn't blame him. What she was about to do could get him fired or worse. But she remembered where he kept the spare badge. She'd seen him slide it behind a loose brick near the back stairs once, just in case. That night, dressed in old scrubs, Diane slipped into the service entrance and found the card. Still there, the hospital slept around her. Only a few nurses made their quiet rounds. She passed unnoticed through the east stairwell, down into the belly of the hospital toward the basement, toward room C4. The air below was stale, damp, and full of old secrets. Fluorescent lights buzzed and flickered like dying fireflies. As Diane walked the narrow hallway, she passed old signage half covered in peeling paint. Records, storage, boiler access. Then she saw it, a metal door with a scratched brass plaque, C4, no knob. Just a keycard scanner, same as before. Diane slid the badge, click, the lock. Disengaged, her heart thundered. She pushed open the door. What she saw didn't make sense. The room wasn't just storage, it was a living space. Old, but lived in a cot with threadbare sheets. A desk covered in medical journals and used syringes. A mirror hung crooked on the wall. The air smelled of antiseptic and metal. In one corner, a small black and white TV played static. There were no windows, only one exit. But what chilled Diane most was the chair bolted to the floor in the center of the room. A restraint chair. Heavy leather straps hung limp at the arms and legs. She stepped closer. The leather was worn. Faint bloodstains marked the armrests. Someone had been kept here for a long time. On the desk was a folder, unlabeled. Inside were Polaroids, blurry, dimly lit. Each one showed a woman in a hospital gown sitting in that chair. Her face was gaunt, her hair shorter. But Diane knew her sister when she saw her. Ellen in a basement trapped. The last photo was dated January 4th, 1983. 3 months ago. That meant she might still be alive. Diane's hands shook. She heard a noise in the hallway. Footsteps. She grabbed the photos, shoved them into her coat, and slipped behind a tall shelf near the wall just as the door opened. A man entered, tall, cold, wearing a long white coat. Dr. Raymond Cole. He didn't speak, didn't turn on the light. He simply walked to the desk, picked up the TV remote, and adjusted the static. Then he stared at the empty chair for nearly 5 minutes, like he was talking to someone. Without words, Diane didn't breathe, not once. Then, Cole turned and walked back out, locking the door behind him. She waited a full 60 seconds before moving again. Her skin crawled. She wasn't imagining it. This wasn't paranoia. Her sister had been held here, tortured, isolated by a doctor. She slipped out and returned to her apartment just before dawn. She didn't sleep. Instead, she lined up the Polaroids, examined each one, and marked the changes: weight loss, bruises, eye contact. Ellen had been deteriorating, but she'd still been alive in January. Diane had to move fast. If she went to the police now, they'd ask how she got the photos, why she was snooping in hospital records. Some might dismiss her again, but there was one person who might listen. Detective Mark Hoyt, retired last year. Diane found him in a quiet suburb west of the city, working part-time security for a grocery store. He looked older, slower, but he still remembered Ellen's case. "You were the sister, right?" he said, squinting at her in the parking lot. "I was. I still am." She handed him the photos. He froze. "What the hell is this? Evidence?" He studied them for several minutes. His voice dropped. This looks like she's been held prisoner." "She was." Hoyt exhaled slowly. "This could be criminal, Diane. I could lose my job just looking at these. I think someone already lost a life," she snapped. "I need you to help me. One more time." He hesitated, then nodded. The next day, Diane and Hoyt met in secret and created a plan. He still had connections in CPD, people who owed him favors. But if they were going to do anything, they needed undeniable proof that Ellen was still alive, which meant one thing: going back to room C4. Diane returned to Lakeside the following night with Hoyt tailing discreetly in a nearby car. If she didn't return in 30 minutes, he would call back up. She slipped inside again. Badge, stairwell, basement. But this time, something was different. Room C4's door was ajar. She stepped closer. Inside, the chair was empty, the cot missing, the photos gone. Someone had cleared the room, fast. Then she saw it, scratched into the side of the metal bed frame, barely visible. "Don't stop. Still here." Ellen had written it recently, and that meant she hadn't been moved far. Suddenly, Diane heard footsteps again, running. This time, she turned, but the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the hallway. She ran, breath ragged, eyes wild behind her. A voice echoed through the corridor. Low, calm, familiar. "Dr. Cole, I knew you'd come back, Diane." She didn't look. She just ran, all the way to the emergency stairwell, all the way into the street, where Hoyt was waiting in his car. He threw open the door and hit the gas. Diane collapsed into the seat. She was shaking, but alive, and now they both knew Ellen wasn't just missing, she was being kept. The doctor's obsession for the next 2 days. Diane barely left her apartment. She didn't eat, barely slept. She just sat with the photos. That last message scratched into the bed frame kept haunting her. "Don't stop. Still here." It wasn't desperation, it was defiance. Ellen was fighting, and Diane had to fight too. Detective Hoyt made a few calls. His old badge still opened doors. People respected him. Quietly, he pulled Ellen's missing persons file from the archives and reopened it, unofficially flagging it for follow-up investigation. Meanwhile, Diane kept digging into Dr. Raymond Cole. At first glance, he was the perfect physician, graduated with honors from Northwestern, commended 3 times for service in critical care, published papers on patient empathy and neurological trauma. But when she looked deeper, the cracks showed. 3 nurses filed complaints against him in the late 70s for inappropriate remarks. None were pursued. One Margaret Lynn transferred hospitals, mid-year, another Samantha Kerr left medicine entirely, and the third, Ellen Carter. Diane's chest tightened. Ellen had never mentioned it, but the paper trail was there buried in HR reports. Under confidential performance review, Diane had to pay an intern at Lakeside $200 in cash just to get access to a redacted copy, and there, in scribbled handwriting next to Ellen's name, not comfortable working with Dr. Cole he watches during night shifts. That complaint had been made 3 weeks before Ellen vanished. Hoyt met Diane at a small diner on the south side. He slid a folder across the table. Inside, floor blueprints of Lakeside General. There's a secondary sub-basement under the west wing, he said. It's marked as sealed. Hasn't been used since '71 when the hospital expanded upward. Diane looked at the map. A stairwell, a corridor, 3 small rooms. One of them was directly beneath. Room C for. Her hands clenched. He moved her, she said. He moved her down. Hoyt nodded. But we need access. And a warrant. Diane looked up. Or we find her first. That night, she went back again. Louise had disappeared. The staff seemed tense. Whispers ran through the halls. She overheard one nurse say, "They're checking badges tonight. Too many weirdos sneaking in." Diane kept her head down, used her old ID, slipped into the service stairwell, down into the sub-basement wing, marked in Hoyt's files. There, past the boiler room. She found it a rusted metal door. No lock, just chained shut. She cut the chain with bolt cutters. Hoyt had left her. The door groaned open. The air was suffocating, stale, like it hadn't been breathed. In decades, her flashlight cut through the dark. 3 doors, 2 were sealed with boards. The third was slightly open. She stepped inside. The smell hit her first disinfectant. Rot, old blood. The walls were lined with thick soundproofing panels. An IV pole stood in the corner. Medical monitors blinked faintly on a dusty cart, powered by a portable generator. In the center of the room was a single bed, empty, but not untouched. The sheets were crumpled. The pillows still warm. A tray with food sat nearby, Hofferton, recently delivered. Her stomach flipped. She turned to the wall and saw something that stopped her cold colon drawings. Hundreds of them, tiny sketches, torn from notebooks and napkins, taped to the wall in a mosaic of desperation. They were of faces. Diane's face, over and over again, drawn by someone who hadn't seen her in years, but remembered every detail. Diane stumbled back. Ellen had been holding on to her image, her memory just to survive. But before she could even call Hoyt, the generator windan shut off. The room went dark. Then a whisper, close, too close. "You shouldn't be here, Diane." She froze, turned. Dr. Cole stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the hallway light. He was calm, terrifyingly calm. "I always knew you'd come," he said. "You took her," Diane spat. "You hurt her." He tilted his head like a curious child. No, I saved her. You kidnapped her. She was breaking, he said softly. They all were. The hospital chews up kind people. Compassion burns them alive. But I preserved her. Diane backed away. Cole stepped inside and closed the door behind him. No one believed me when I said the system was poison, he said. But Ellen did. She was pure, gentle. I had to protect that. You caged her. He nodded slowly. I kept her safe from them. Diane reached for her pepper spray. Spray. Cole screamed and stumbled. She shoved past him into the hallway. Sprinting. Her breath thundered. Footsteps followed. She raced through the basement corridor, turned left, then slammed into a figure. Hoyt, he grabbed her, pulled her behind him, gun drawn. Cole emerged seconds later, eyes red, face twisted. Raymond Cole, Hoyt barked, "You're under arrest." Cole didn't run, didn't flinch. He simply smiled. They'll forget her again. Just like last time, they didn't. Police swarmed the sub-basement. Inside. They found the 4 logs, photos, Ellen's drawings, and a hidden crawl space under the bed where she had been kept between shifts. But Ellen wasn't there. Cole refused to talk. Diane stood outside the hospital as the sun rose. She should have felt relief, but all she felt was dread. Ellen was still missing. The monster had been caged, but the victim was still lost. Heartbeat in the walls one day after Cole's arrest. Diane sat in the station across from Detective Hoyt, studying a photo of the crawl space found under the sub-basement bed. It was crudensulated, cramped, just 4 feet wide. They'd found strands of hair, a torn scrap of cloth, and blood. Dried but recent. But no body, no Ellen, not Raymond Cole. He had said nothing since his arrest, not a single word, not a request, not a confession, not a denial. Only one thing: she's still here, just not where you're looking. Diane had gone over every floor plan, every hallway, every maintenance tunnel. There were places in Lakeside General that hadn't seen footsteps in years. Abandoned wings, structural voids left untouched after the 71 expansion. And according to Hoyt, old rumors said one of the architects had designed Secret Service tunnels beneath the psych ward used during riots and fire evacuations. Most were sealed, but not all. She returned to the hospital that night, not sneaking in, not hiding. She walked through the front door, eyes forward, heart pounding. She carried the stethoscope, the one Ellen had left in the thrift shop, the one with the hidden message: basement, room C4. Not safe. Don't trust Cole. She held it like a compass. She followed its memory down the stairs, past C4, past the sealed sub-basement, and then she found it behind an old vending machine, a maintenance panel. The screws were rusted, but loose. Inside, a narrow concrete shaft, thick with cobwebs and dust, big enough for a person to crawl through. She switched on her headlamp and began to move forward. The tunnel was endless. Her elbows scraped the walls. Rodents squeaked in the dark, but something pulled her onward, an invisible thread wound between instinct and hope. After 20 minutes, the passage widened slightly. Then she heard it, a sound, faint, thump-thump, thump-thump, a heartbeat. No, too regular, too mechanical. She followed the sound, and then a space opened up, small, hidden, like a tomb built in secret. And in the middle of that chamber was a bed, and in that bed a woman, Ellen. Her body was thin, eyes shut, hair matted, tubes snaked from her arms to a bag of saline nearly empty. Diane froze. Tears broke free before she realized they were coming. "Ellen?" She stepped forward, kneeling. "Ellen, it's me." A blink, barely, then again. Those eyes slowly opened. Recognition bloomed like sunrise. Ain. It was a whisper, but it shattered everything. Diane wrapped her arms around her, trembling, weeping, whispering, "You're safe now. I found you. I found you." The rescue was chaos. Medics flooded the hospital tunnels. Police sealed off the corridors. Reporters circled like vultures by. Dawn, but none of that mattered. What mattered was the monitor. The one in the ICU room hours later. The one that finally showed Ellen's heart beating on its own again. Raymond Cole's trial began months later. He pled not guilty by reason of mental defect, claimed he had rescued Ellen from a broken system. The court disagreed. He was sentenced to life without parole, and still, through every hearing, he only ever said one sentence. She was the only one who listened. Ellen stayed in recovery for months. The damage to her muscles and mind ran deep, but one thing never faded. Her memory of Diane's voice, the way it echoed in her mind like a lighthouse through the storm. "Don't stop. Still hear the letter." Left unread, the media called it a miracle. A sister's undying love. A twist of fate. A nightmare undone by persistence. But Diane Carter didn't feel triumphant. She felt haunted. The day after Ellen's rescue, Diane returned to her apartment, collapsed onto the couch, and stared at the unopened envelope she had carried for 4 years. It was the last letter Ellen had mailed. Postmarked August 2nd, 1979, 2 days before she vanished. Diane hadn't opened it then. Too busy, too distracted, too certain she'd see her sister again that weekend, but now, her fingers trembled as she peeled it open. Inside, a single sheet of lined paper folded twice. "I know you're tired. So am I. These night shifts are burning me out. But last night something happened. I can't explain it yet. I heard something in the walls. A voice, not mine. I think someone's trapped. Or hiding. I'm going back down tonight. If anything feels wrong, I'll call you, I promise. Love, Ellen Deanne." Let the paper fall into her lap. Her eyes burned. The voice in the walls. It hadn't been someone else. It had been her, Ellen, calling out for help, trapped in that hellish room and the hospital. They'd dismissed her fears, called her overworked, stressed. Even the doctor in charge had made notes suggesting mild auditory hallucinations. That doctor, Raymond Cole. The basement diaries, the investigation into Lakeside General exploded overnight. The hospital's board of directors scrambled to distance themselves from Cole, who had worked there for nearly 18 years. News reports revealed Cole had been disciplined twice for inappropriate conduct, though charges had never stuck. And then came the basement, behind sealed records, hidden beneath repair invoices and defunct blueprints. Police found a pattern 10 years earlier. A young orderly named Thomas Reyes had filed a complaint against Cole, claimed he'd seen the doctor entering the basement at odd hours. Reyes disappeared. 2 months later, missing, never found. Detective Hoyt reopened the file, and what they found chilled even the seasoned officers. Cole had documented everything, not just Ellen's captivity, everything: journals, photos, recordings of conversations, many with patients who had been drugged into incoherence. Some were labeled tests, some therapy, others simply silence. The sub-basement was more than a hiding place. It was a laboratory. Hoyt stood in the middle of it one night, recording the evidence, and muttered. He was studying her like a subject. But he fell in love. That's when it all turned. Shadows of recovery. Meanwhile, Ellen remained in the hospital's critical care ward. Her body was slowly rebuilding. Her mind, fragile. Doctors called it prolonged captivity trauma. She flinched at fluorescent lights, startled when doors shut. She hadn't spoken more than 5 sentences since her rescue, but Diane didn't care. She came every day with soup, with flowers, with patience. And then, one afternoon, Ellen whispered, "Do they know about the others?" Diane froze. What? Others? The voices. I wasn't alone. Not always. Names in the dark the next day. Diane brought photos from cold case files Detective Hoyt had shared with her. Faces of missing nurses, patients, even a janitor from the early 80s. Ellen's hands shook as she pointed to one. Her, she used, to sing. I heard it. I thought I was dreaming. It was Martha Green, a nurse who had disappeared in 1981, never found. Hoyt cross-referenced Martha's file. Last shift, Lakeside General, supervisor on duty, Dr. Raymond Cole. It wasn't just obsession, it was pattern, predation. And suddenly, they weren't just solving Ellen's disappearance. They were unearthing a decade of darkness. Echoes in the Venelin began to speak more, but only in fragments. She often murmured to herself, strings of words that made no sense to others but seemed to tether her to reality. Diane noticed it first. Those moments when Ellen stared at the foredrip and whispered, "Day 50, salt crackers, rain again." One day, Diane placed a small tape recorder on the nightstand. "If you're ready," she said, gently, "tell me what you remember." It took 3 days. Then Ellen pressed the red button. Her voice was slow, unsure but clear. "He told me it was temporary. Said the hospital had failed me. Said I was too good, too pure, to be wasted in those corridors. At first, I believed him. I thought maybe he'd found something no one else could see. Then the door closed and never opened again." Hours of recordings followed Ellen, recounting each passing year, the seasonal changes she tracked by temperature shifts, the scraps of radio left on for her as a cruel form of contact. But what Diane remembered most was a sentence spoken in the softest whisper. "He wanted to make me forget you, but I didn't. Not once." The fire code detective Hoyt kept digging. He wasn't done. Cole's blueprints were extensive, but they weren't official. The hospital had undergone 3 renovations between 1969 and 1983, but one building inspector's report stood out a fire code violation citation from 1975. It mentioned something unusual, a door leading nowhere behind the psychiatric ward. No follow-up, no resolution on record. Hoyt pulled the original inspector out of retirement. The man, Ray Lockett, was in his 80s, but remembered everything. "Oh yeah," he said, tapping the folder. "I flagged that door, but someone from administration told me to leave it, said it was legacy structure, too expensive to remove." Hoyt visited the site with a new team. What they found was a false wall, and behind it, another room, empty, but stained, scratched, and on the wall, faintly carved, "Please, I'm still here." The list among Cole's journals. Authorities discovered a list. No dates, no titles, just names. 17 of them. Only 6 were alive. The rest, presumed missing. 2 had been found over the years, one in a river, one in a burnt-out car. Both cases had remained unsolved. Now, with Cole's handwriting as evidence, the puzzle pieces were shifting. Hoyt cross-referenced hospital records, patient logs, and resignation files. Each name on the list had intersected with Cole during their final week on record. Each had lodged a complaint, or was listed in an incident report. They hadn't just vanished, they'd been erased. The girl in the picture, Diane, sat beside Ellen's hospital bed, flipping through old photos, anything to spark joy or connection. One fell out. A Polaroid. A girl with long red hair, standing near an old vending machine. Ellen's hand shot forward, gripping Diane's wrist. Her. Who is she? Sarah. She brought me food, once. She said she'd seen the tunnels. Diane froze. Sarah Lane, volunteer nurse aide. Disappeared 1982. Diane showed the photo to Hoyt. He narrowed his eyes. That vending machine, that's the one you moved before finding the shaft. They searched beneath it again, behind the shaft wall. They discovered a thin gap, a pocket, not visible from the original path. Inside, a bone fragment, a necklace, and Sarah's ID badge. The final tape, one of the final entries in Cole's recordings, was dated just 2 weeks before his arrest. It was addressed to Ellen. You never understood. I didn't lock you away. I freed you. You were too fragile for their world. I saved you from it. You should have thanked me. But then, another voice, not Ellen, weak. Male, please. Water. The voice of Thomas Reyes, the missing orderly from 1972. The team returned to the hospital, reopening parts of the sub-basement previously believed empty, and this time they found the remnants of a second containment space. Empty but unmistakable. Echoes of justice. By late 1984, Lakeside General was facing multiple lawsuits. The board resigned. The hospital was restructured. Ellen, though still healing, agreed to testify. Her voice shook, but her words cut clear. I'm not just a survivor. I'm a witness. And there are others who never got that chance. The media hailed her as a hero, but Diane knew better. Ellen didn't want praise. She wanted silence to be broken. Together, they started a foundation to investigate medical abuse, cases nationwide, and at the end of every press interview, Diane would say, check the walls, check the tunnels, and never stop listening. The hollow pulse, the exhumation request came unexpectedly. Detective Hoyt had been following up a rhythmic coincidence in the timeline of the disappearances. Every third Friday of October, like a ritual, every time someone vanished. And one named Margaret Holloway stood out. She was listed as dead from natural causes in 1980. An orderly, no investigation, no autopsy. But her death date matched one. Of the suspicious Fridays, her grave, when opened, was empty. Nothing but a bundle of insulation, hospital linens, and a name tag that didn't belong to her. Sarah Lane's Hoyt stared into the coffin. Another lie, another shell. Between the walls, Ellen's progress was steady. She could now walk short distances with a cane. Her words came faster, fuller. One evening, during a thunderstorm, she sat with Diane and asked, "Did you ever go into the walls?" Diane blinked. "What do you mean?" Ellen gestured vaguely to the corner of the room. There were voices behind the walls. Not always words, but movement. Humming sometimes. Low humming. Diane didn't sleep that night. She went to the archives, in a forgotten storage room. She found something chilling. Old schematics of the 1958 structure, before the expansions, A maintenance schematic showed narrow crawl spaces behind patient rooms SOUNDPROOFED.Y. She took the blueprints to Hoyt. His face hardened. Let's see what's behind those walls. They brought in forensic techs, acoustic mapping, small drills, endoscopic cameras. What they found behind two rooms C213 and C214 wasn't air dot, it was wood paneling, insulated lining, and in one section, a small set of teeth, child-sized. No records of pediatric patients admitted, just a line in Cole's journal. The girl couldn't stop crying. The whisper corridor, the staff called it the whisper corridor back in the 70s. A narrow hallway that connected the east and west wings through the psych floor. It was abandoned after a fire in 7-4, sealed dot, but not forgotten dot. Ellen remembered the corridor vividly. He used it when he was angry. She told Diane, said it was faster than walking around. I could hear his shoes, the metal scrape on concrete. Hoyt had it reopened. The passage was thick with mold. Pipes dripped, the stench was choking, and halfway through tape to a rusted pipe was another, photographed of a woman bruised. Eyes open, lips sewn shut with surgical thread, no identity, no context, no name, just a number scrawled on the back. 6. It matched a name from Cole's list. Denise Raines, missing since 1979. When the lights flicker in one of Ellen's recordings, she spoke about the lights. They never went out, but they flickered every time he came close, like the electricity knew what was coming. Diane, disturbed by the memory, went back to the hospital's engineering records. Every week for 7 years, power fluctuations were logged in Wing C. Same day, same hour. The system chalked it up to faulty wiring, but Hoyt had another idea. They set up sensors in the hallway near Elon's old chamber and waited the first night. Nothing. The second at 11:42 p.m., the lights flickered. Motion was detected in the sealed corridor, but no one was inside. The forgotten room, the tape behind the brick. 2 days after the corridor incident, Diane received a box. No sender, no label, just her name, handwritten. Inside, a VHS tape, and a typed note, play it, alone. The hospital still had an old break room with a working player. She inserted the tape, static buzzed, then cleared. Grainy footage of a hospital room, not recent. The frame tilted. Someone was holding the camera, breathing audibly. Ellen sat on a bed, dazed. A voice off camera said, "Smile." She didn't. The voice said it again, then screaming, muffled, cut off. The video ended. Diane rewound it, paused it at a flash of light in the corner, zoomed, brightened, a nameplate on the wall. Storage room B12. She called Hoyt. The room had been sealed since 1985. A mold issue, they said. They broke the lock. Inside, a mattress, old 4 stands, syringes, and 3 boxes of tapes. Dozens of hours of surveillance. Ellen wasn't the first. She wasn't the only one. Lullabies and locks, they watched the tapes for days. Some were labeled, others weren't. One showed a young woman reciting a lullaby over and over. She spoke to the wall, or to herself. Another showed Raymond Cole, alone, pacing in a room. Talking to the camera, they think healing is medicine. It's not. It's attention. It's listening. Then he turned to someone off screen. "Isn't that right, Margaret?" She answered with a nod and a tear. Margaret Holloway, listed as dead, alive on tape. The forgotten room. Diane found the door by accident. A breeze behind a bookcase in the staff library. She moved it. Dust swirled a door. No knob, just a keyhole shaped like a spade. She used a skeleton key from maintenance. It clicked. The room was soundproofed, furnished like an office. Typewriter, books. A clock stopped at 2:13. On the wall, patient photos. Red thread connected some others. Had black X's over their faces. In the desk drawer, a file labeled EC. Ellen Carter. It included intake notes, psychological evaluations, discharge form never submitted. A note: she listens, she stays. Diane backed away, called Hoyt. They sealed the room as evidence. Cole had kept records, detailed, chilling, obsessive. The stethoscope returns one night. A package arrived for Ellen. No return address. Inside, her original stethoscope, the one Diane had found in the thrift shop. But this time, the tubing held a new note. There are more. Ellen's hands trembled. She whispered, "He's not working alone." The sound that shouldn't exist, the room without a door after the motion. Sensors picked up unexplained movement. Diane and Hoyt combed through the blueprints again. But it wasn't the schematics that cracked the code. It was a janitor named Leo. Leo had worked at Lakeside since 1972. He remembered everything. The broken boilers, the collapsing wing in 77, even the ghost stories. "You're looking for the room without a door," he told them. They laughed at first. Then he led them to it, behind the boiler room. At the end of a short hall, now bricked over, was a section of wall that sounded different when tapped. Hollow dot, they chiseled it. Open dot behind it, a small chamber, soundproofed. Metal walls. One rusted bed. A broken camcorder. A feeding tray, stained with mold. And a notebook inside. Dozens of pages. All in the same hand. Raymond Cole's. She stopped screaming after 3 days. Her favorite color was green. She reminds me of the girl in the hallway. Dozens of victims. Dozens of scribbled observations. One name appeared again. And again, Mallory, not Ellen, not Denise. A new name, unknown to the case. The voice on tape forensics examined the camcorder. Its battery was long dead, but the internal tape was intact. Diane didn't want to watch it, but Ellen insisted. The footage was grainy. A woman sat on the bed, arms bound, hair matted. She was humming a lullaby, one Diane recognized from childhood. Suddenly, a voice behind the camera. "Tell them what we rehearsed." The woman turned, eyes dead. "My name is Mallory Grace. I'm safe. I chose to be here." Cut to static. Then another clip. The same room. Empty. Only the camera remained. Hoyt froze the frame in the corner. A small detail, the edge of a nurse's badge. Initials, RC echoes from the morgue. They dug deeper into personnel files. Mallory Grace had never worked at Lakeside, but her name appeared. Once, on a 1978 intake form, she had come in after a suicide attempt, stayed for 3 weeks in psychiatric care. Her release form was signed by Dr. Raymond Cole. The file ended there, but the hospital morgue records listed a Jane Doe brought in 6 months later. No ID, blonde, early 30s, cause of death, trauma, body cremated, signed by R. Cole. 2 women, Hoyt murmured, same man, same signature, same pattern. They were beginning to understand something terrifying. Raymond Cole hadn't just kept Ellen. He had been practicing, perfecting, Buried rooms. Construction records showed several rooms beneath the psychiatric wing were permanently closed off after the 1971 expansion. Unstable ground, the documents claimed, but new seismic scans revealed something else. The rooms were intact. Hoyt secured a warrant. It took 2 days to break through. What they found was devastating. 3 separate cells, each with restraints, each with initials, scratched into the wall, MGDRLN, all names from Cole's journal. Each cell had a mirror angled toward the ceiling, and on the ceiling hidden, until the right light hit it, an inscription. They only saw what I showed them. Diane backed out of the room, shaking. This wasn't about rescue, she whispered. It was about control. The phantom alarm, it began with a noise. A distant alarm, high-pitched, rhythmic, impossible to trace. Ellen heard it first. She was resting in a rehabilitation suite when the sound cut through her headphones. A shrill, pulsing beep. But when the nurses checked the room, nothing was beeping. Diane heard it next. While reviewing tapes, she paused on a static frame and felt something, a pressure. Then, the beep. It came every night after midnight. For exactly 42 seconds, Hoyt triangulated the signal with engineers. It originated from a floor that, officially, didn't exist. Sublevel 3. There was no elevator access, no stairs, no records, just a flicker in the old schematic SAN, incomplete. Blueprint, blacked out, redacted. They found a single maintenance shaft had led them down. What they found was not a floor, it was a lab. Files from the void, dust-covered computers lined the walls, tapes, cabinets, preserved patient files dated between 1969 and 1985. This wasn't standard hospital treatment. This was research.experiments, on trauma, isolation, sensory deprivation, names. Redacted, but one file remained intact. Subject 47, Ellen Voss. The date was 5 years before she ever applied for a nursing job. This is impossible, Diane whispered. A picture was attached. A young girl, 6 years old. Brown curls. It was Ellen. She had been a patient here before she ever remembered it. The nurse who vanished twice. Diane dug through Ellen's early life. Adoption records. Foster placements. There was a blank gap from age 5 to 7. Ellen had always assumed it was just the transition between homes. But Hoyt found an erased entry in state archives. A brief placement under government care. Location undisclosed. Guardian. Dr. R. Cole. He had access to her twice, Hoyt said. First as a child, then as an adult. Why? Ellen's memories began to unravel. The lullaby, the tunnels, the heartbeat through the walls. They weren't just nightmares. They were echoes of a life buried by design. The silent interview, they returned to the prison. Raymond Cole sat in silence. Then Diane played the sound. The phantom alarm for the first time in months, he reacted. A single tear rolled down his cheek. That sound means it's waking up, he said. What is? Diane demanded. He looked up, smiled faintly, the part of her that remembers. He leaned forward. It won't stop until she knows everything. All the rooms at once the old blueprints had never shown it. But when Diane overlaid 3 versions from 1969, 1971, and 1980, saw something odd. A hollow gap between wings, A and B unmarked, windowless, roughly 20 feet long. Hoyt called it a drafting error. Leo called it what it was, a buried corridor. They followed the outline with ground-penetrating radar. There was something there, and when they broke through, it wasn't a corridor. It was a gallery, photos. Dozens of them, black and white, taped to the walls. Each image showed a woman, bound, seated, eyes forward, each marked with a number, some with names, others with dates. Ellen was number 12, Mallory was number 4, none after 12, which meant Ellen was the last. Or the only survivor. Diane stared at the gallery like a war memorial. Each woman had been catalogued, posed, and ultimately erased until now. Echo chamber in the psychiatric records. Diane found notes scrawled in the margins by Dr. Raymond Cole himself. She hears them, all of them. The ones before, she mimics their grief, like a sponge. Empathy, when weaponized, becomes obedience. What did he mean? Ellen, when asked, explained something strange. I had dreams, like they were memories, but not mine. Dreams of tunnels, dreams of rooms without light, dreams of humming lullabies. She never learned. It was as if the walls had absorbed the past and passed it on. The nurses' ward in the far west wing of Lakeside, a no-condemned ward held administrative storage. Diane and Hoyt got access through old keys Leo still carried on his belt. There, behind rusted cabinets and shattered glass, they found a locked drawer inside ID badges. Dozens, all expired, all nurses. Ellen's was there. So was Mallory's, falsified. She had never been hired, but someone made it look like she had. Along with 3 others they couldn't match to hospital staff. Each badge bore Cole's handwriting on the back. Believed, listened, disappeared. And then a 6th badge, pristine, unused, a name Diane recognized. J. Beckett, Janine Beckett, Ellen's closest friend in training, presumed to have died in a car crash in 1980. Except now, maybe she hadn't. The woman who wasn't gone, the breath. Between walls 2 weeks after the discovery of the underground cells, the hospital was sealed off. News vans parked outside like vultures, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Inside, floors creaked under the weight of secrets. Ellen had been moved to a quiet facility in the countryside, a place with windows and light, but her sleep was still haunted. Each night, she murmured names no one else recognized. Mallory, Denise, Lydia, Names of ghosts only she had met. Diane visited every day. She brought lavender oil, stories from home, and when Ellen was strong enough, questions. What do you remember about the last time you saw Cole? She asked softly. Ellen's hands shook. She stared at the garden outside before answering. He told me I wasn't supposed to exist outside him, that I was a mirror, that if I tried to leave, I'd vanish. Diane held her hand. You're real, you're here. But Elon's eyes remained distant. The nurse who left no trace. Hoyt had reopened dozens of cold files. Women listed as transfers, resignations, sudden departures. One stood out. Denise Ralston, a nurse from the oncology floor. She vanished in 1979. The note in her file said she'd moved to Canada, no forwarding address. But her paycheck continued to be deposited for 18 months. Hoyt tracked the bank. The branch manager confirmed something chilling. Every deposit was made in person, but she never spoke, wore sunglasses, always had gloves. Surveillance was grainy, but the posture matched another figure from years later. The woman in the tape, Mallory, and maybe Naves, unmarked graves in a quiet corner of Lakeside's old garden. A groundskeeper reported something strange. A patch of soil that never froze in winter, always loose, always warm. A forensic team dug. For feet down, they found a box, inside bones, female, a locket, and fabric with nurse insignia. Dental records later confirmed the impossible. Denise Ralston, who was withdrawing her checks. Diane asked Hoyt. He didn't answer, but his eyes flicked to the photo of Cole's earliest psychiatric notes about identity transference, about breaking someone and replacing them with another. The woman who wasn't gone one rainy night. Ellen woke up screaming. Diane ran in, heart pounding. She's here, she's still here, in the walls, Ellen cried. It took an hour to calm her down. She insisted it wasn't a nightmare, it was memory. That there had been another woman alive in the crawl space. A girl who whispered songs in the dark. Someone who tapped messages against the walls. Hoyt brought in a structural acoustics expert. They found it. A hollow cavity behind the wall in Ellen's old chamber they drilled, and in that space was a journal, dated 1982, signed only with the letter L. Inside, descriptions of Cole, of routines, of fear, and a final entry. He started forgetting who we are. Calls me Ellen now. Says I look just like her, but I'm not. I won't be. The identity room echoes in the files. The journal, signed with the letter L, sent shockwaves through Diane and Hoyt's investigation. It was proof of a second consciousness. Another survivor, another prisoner. They scoured employment records, hospital files, and public archives for any staff or patients whose names began with L. Between 1975 and 1985, 24 names emerged. 3 stood out. Lana Markle, nurse, vanished 1983. Leslie Garland, medical assistant, discharged after psychiatric evaluation. Lucinda Graves, psych patient, admitted 1981, no record of release, but only one was marked deceased. Lucinda, cause of death, suicide, cremated. Signed by R. Cole. Hoyt muttered, she never left, he just erased her. A room built from faces construction maps revealed. A chamber tucked behind the south wall of the old psychiatric wing. No doors, no ventilation, yet infrared scans showed warmth. Someone's been in there recently, Hoyt said. Diane and the team drilled through. Inside was a space barely 6 feet across, lined wall to wall with mirrors, each mirror etched with a different name. Ellen, Mallory, Lucinda, Lydia, Denise. A single chair stood in the center, straps attached, facing all the reflections. It wasn't a room for torture. It was a room for programming. He made them into what he wanted, Diane whispered, by forcing them to see what he saw. Hoyt pointed to something. Near the base of one mirror, a smear of blood, and a number 8, double quotes, the tape that shouldn't exist. Digital recovery teams managed to extract partial audio from a destroyed cassette found inside the chair's compartment. The voice was unmistakable. Cole, you are Ellen now. Ellen is calm. Ellen listens. Ellen smiles when spoken to. A faint reply. Not Ellen, but someone trying. I, Ellen, then silence. The audio cut out with the sound of sobbing. The identity room. Diane stood in the middle of the chamber, overwhelmed. This wasn't about imprisonment. It was about replacement. Cole had created copies. Women who forgot who they were because he'd burned their past away and replaced it with scripted identity. Ellen hadn't just been taken. She had been remade, and perhaps before her so had others. Diane looked at the blood-marked number again. 8. We thought Ellen was the first. She might be the 8th. Hoyt exhaled sharply. Then who was number 1? Whispers from number 1. The letter with no address a week after the discovery of the journal. Diane sat alone in the Pierce family kitchen, the scent of peppermint tea mixing with dust and old pine wood. A padded envelope sat in front of her. No return address. Only a typewritten label. Diane Carter, personal. She opened it cautiously. Inside, a faded Polaroid. It showed Ellen Allardyce wide, a bruise under her cheek, her hand holding up. A number scrawled on cardboard. #1. There was a letter, typed, neat, precise. You think you found her. You found a her, but not the one. Number 1 was the start. But how many more do you think there are? You listened. That's why you were chosen to receive this. Diane's breath caught in her throat. The back of the photo held GPS. Cordons she dialed Hoyt. Bring a team, she said. We're not done. Whispers from number 1, the GPS led them to a shuttered private clinic on the outskirts of Lake Forest. Built in the 1950s, the building had sat condemned since '84. Hoyt's team swept the perimeter. The back door was chained shut, but had fresh scratches. Someone had tried to break out. They pried it open. Inside, dust-choked hallways, flickering lights, and silence so heavy it buzzed in their ears. Room number 1 was at the end of the east wing. Inside, a chair, straps, and a mirror. Behind the mirror, another room, a bed, a sink, drawings on the walls, and a message, not Ellen, not Denise, not Mallory, not me, just ... number 1. They found recordings on reel-to-reel tapes stacked in a metal box, each labeled with dates and initials. RC. They played the first. Cole's voice echoed through the tiny speaker. Subject 1, responsive to sound, identifies as Lydia now. Correction required. Another tape, another voice, female, thin, exhausted. Please, tell Diane I'm real. The spiral pattern in Cole's personal notes now, fully unsealed by court order. Diane and Hoyt found a disturbing pattern he had assigned. Numbers to his victims. Ellen was not the only one. There had been at least 6, each recorded, trained, broken down. All within rooms he referred to as spokes of his wheel. The center. Room C4. Cole had built a system around identity erasure, around devotion and replication. He wasn't imprisoning women, he was rebuilding them. One note read, 2. Protect compassion, I must contain it. Fragment it, multiply it. It wasn't madness, it was ritual. And it wasn't over, because number 1's fingerprints didn't match any known records. She had never been reported missing. Who was she, and where were numbers 2 through 5? The center of the spiral returned to Platform 9. The Birmingham station had changed in 6 years. New ticket counters, digital screens, cleaner tiles, but Diane saw none of it. Her eyes were fixed on the older corners, places untouched by modernization, places where memories clung like dust. She returned with Ellen, not to chase ghosts, but to confront them. Hoyt had unearthed another file buried deep under misfiled records. A psychiatric transfer form, never signed, dated March 1981. The patient listed was simply L, the same handwriting as the journal, the same initial, and attached an unsigned photo, blurry but unmistakable. A third woman, not Ellen, not Denise, but someone else entirely. And Diane's instincts said the answers were still beneath the old structure, below. The timetable, guided by the old blueprints, Diane and Hoyt traced the old storm tunnels beneath the train station. Once used during World War II, they had long since been sealed to the public. But rats knew them. Water still found them. And maybe so had coal. They pried open a rusted door behind a janitor's closet. Air moaned through the gap. Inside, total dark, they descended, brick by damp brick, until they reached a chamber carved from stone. Old crates, discarded uniforms, a rusted rail wheel, and a wall of photos, pinned with surgical precision. Nurses, ID, cards, headshots, sketches, all women, all disappeared. And in the center, like a sun in a twisted constellation, was Ellen's face. Hoyt counted the spiral room in the deepest section of the chamber. Behind a false wall was a room, circular, lined with mirrors. A camera sat in the center. Red light blinking. The walls were covered in writing. Echo, replace, repeat. Dozens of journals, identical to the one Diane had found stacked on shelves. But one was different. Its cover had no dust. Its spine wasn't cracked. Inside the final entry, he thinks I'm the last. But I remember the others. I remember me. If someone finds this, don't look for their names. Look for the mirror. That's where he kept us. And taped to the inside Coover a key engraved with the initials DR. The door beneath the mirror. They returned to the hospital, to room C4. To the mirror. Hoyt had it removed from the wall. Behind it, dash plaster, behind that metal. A hatch, and the key fit. Inside, a vertical shaft with a ladder leading down. Cold air spiraled upward like breath from the dead. At the bottom, a final room, not a cell, a theater, a single chair, a projector, film reels stacked in metal cases, the walls padded, SOUNDPROOFED, and the films each labeled with a name, Ellen, Denise, Lydia, Mallory, and dozens more. Cole had documented everything, every scream, every ritual, every attempt to reshape their identities. It was the archive of madness, and now it was evidence. Release weeks later. The case was closed. 30-7 missing women officially linked to Cole. 8 bodies found. 3 survivors. Ellen testified, slowly but bravely. Diane stood beside her. The media called it the Angel Collector case. But for Ellen, it wasn't about headlines. It was about voices, about returning the names to the nameless. She started a foundation for survivors of medical coercion. She and Diane lived by the lake now, quiet, safe. Sometimes Ellen still wore the stethoscope, not to listen for patients, but to remember what a heartbeat sounds like when it finally comes home, the end. Thanks for sticking with Flicker Soul Story until the end. If you enjoyed it, give this a like and share if you haven't already, and subscribe for more.